Hey, everybody. Welcome. We got that up there? Yeah. We don't need this anymore. I've used my alcohol spray on the microphone and everywhere else, just so you know how I do things. I spray it on my hands, and if it's really good, it's 70% ethanol and not any of the other ones, so you can always drink it if you have to. Hear, hear. I'm going to talk about inhalation kinetics with GasMan. My goal is to get you oriented to it so that you can learn kinetics on your own. That's the whole idea here. It's a sort of a mini workshop, and my goal is to just get you to learn things on your own. You got to do that these days. Disclosures, I've got no financial interest in GasMan. I wrote it. I'm the author. It's a nonprofit corporation. I take nothing from it. I put things into it. But my goal as an engineer in my background is to have written this so that anesthesiologists and anesthesia care providers around the world can understand what we're doing for a living. And we really are using this class of drugs for a living. Optimal anesthesia, optimal volatile agent delivery. You want accurate control of the anesthetic state. You want to anesthetize the patient's brain and spinal cord, get the anesthetic agent to that effect site, produce the correct anesthetic level there, and then reverse the process rapidly at the end to wake them right up. To do this, we should understand the kinetics and what to expect and monitor and adjust things that really happen. This is what the GasMan picture looks like. Raise your hand if you have seen this before so I know the audience better. Raise your hand if you have not seen it before. And raise your hand if you've used it a moderate amount before. Great. Perfect audience. One or two of you have. I'm hoping that sometime later when you're giving talks to the CA1s in a future year here, it will be the other way around where people will say, oh yes, we learned it this way. When I go to meetings around the country and elsewhere, people say, oh, that's how I learned inhalation kinetics years ago. Thank you for coming and trying to keep this concept alive. So here we have what I call a structure behavior model. The structure is the way the gases move around. The behavior is we watch it. We've got the anesthetic level or partial pressure of anesthetic on the upper part of the picture. Now this is partial pressure, not concentration. Concentrations equilibrate and they end up with different values. Partial pressures, when they equilibrate, they equalize so that they are actually the same level. That's the power of our inhaled drugs because we can measure the partial pressure. We can measure the level in the blood as well as the level in the patient's exhaled gas because they are the same number. We call it percent. When it's in the blood or it's in the gas, it's percent of 1 atmosphere of partial pressure. That's why it all works. With our intravenous drugs, when we put them into the body and somebody measures the concentration, if there's a lot of lipid in the blood, the drug is hidden in that lipid. It looks like there's a high concentration of drug, but the effect of the drug can be absolutely zero. The chemical activity is what physicists would call that. It's the chemical activity that we care, and that's what happens in the brain, and it happens to be partial pressure that works. In the bottom, we have the flow of carrier gas and agent as it moves across this model. So the anesthetic tension or partial pressure goes from that which is delivered from the vaporizer into the breathing circuit to produce the inspired concentration, I can still call it, then gets to the alveoli, or I can also allow it to call it the concentration, into arterial blood, and then into the brain, which is now a partial pressure thing. Brain, other tissues, my mouse will not go over that far, yes, I guess it will, muscle, fat, and into venous blood. The anesthetic in the venous blood then comes back again. It comes back to the patient's lungs. And when it gets back to the patient's lungs, depending upon where our fresh gas flow and other settings are, it either goes out to the atmosphere or it gets breathed again. So it's going in both of these directions all of the time, and that's the piece that makes the math seemingly complicated, but actually it is quite easy. We're looking down below at the fresh gas flow is the linkage between the vaporizer and the breathing circuit. The alveolar ventilation is the linkage between the breathing circuit, and the cardiac output is the linkage between the patient's lungs and the tissues. So those are the linkages that are carrying it. They are the conductances, the opposite of resistance. We learned about resistance in high school, probably was the last time. The resistance is that which blocks things from moving. 1 over the resistance is always the conductance. And that's what the model has for the flow. It's how it's conducting or propagating from the vaporizer to the patient's brain. In the bottom right-hand corner, we have the timing. We know how long the simulation's been going for. We've got the patient's quantity of uptake into the body and the quantity delivered. We can measure that quantity in liters of vapor, milliliters of liquid, or dollars of cost. Any of those with a single click, we move back and forth depending upon what thing we want to talk about. When we're saving money, we'll talk about the dollars. When we're saving the atmosphere, we'll talk about the concentration and quantity of our inhaled agents going up there and depleting the ozone layer a little bit, or maybe a lot if we're using a lot of it or the wrong drug. Our goal is to control the anesthetic level in the patient's vessel-rich group or brain. That's what we get paid for, get the brain asleep and then get the brain awake. That's what we do for a living, essentially. And it can be 1 Mac, that dotted line that I've got there, or some multiple or fraction of Mac. If you're giving lots of IV drugs to a patient, you may want 1/10 of a Mac or 2/10 of a Mac. We heard somewhere that something that we're not allowed to talk about anywhere, that occasionally you have a patient where that level of anesthetic is not high enough, and therefore this patient is awake when you don't want that patient to be awake. It can happen. The GasMan model I wrote as an educational tool, and I put the numbers in that great scientists have measured in blood solubility and flows and tissue solubilities, and Professor Eager ground up all the tissues of all animals and measured the solubility in all of them. And earlier than that, Seymour Ketty had said, the way the model works is the way I then copied in GasMan, from vaporizer to breathing circuit, et cetera. When I put those together in this model, it turns out that it gets the answers right. That is, Bouillon and Schaefer demonstrated that for wash-in for a 6-hour anesthetic, wash and then wash out after breathing, well, it's right for short anesthetics and long anesthetics. Complicated slide to simply say, as far as the data is concerned, it's pretty close to most patients. It is not perfect. And when Ravi Shankar studied this in India, he, by the way, is the dean of the medical school, who was giving more GasMan workshops than I ever have, demonstrated that the anesthetic level versus the model are almost identical, and the only reason they seem not to be identical is that your agent monitor doesn't have enough significant figures. And these are all half of the least significant figure of error. All patients turn out to match this very well because the scientists before me had made the right measurements there. Well, so what we have for you in this department, as I did just the last couple of days, was I put a site license on as many of the computers as I could find. If a computer has this label stuck to it, it means it's got a site license in it. So you can very quickly see that. I had thought originally that we might do this exercise with me now saying, go find computers anywhere in the department. If it's got a sticker on it, go there and watch this on Zoom. But we decided this was a much safer thing. We're all far enough apart from each other, and it's working out very well. You all know, I'm sure by now, exactly this website and can do it off the top of your head and type it in quickly. I can't. I must confess, I don't know. Am I the only one who has trouble getting to our website? I'm just going to hit escape for a second here. So we're now in our website, and it is placed under clinical information, anesthesia technology. Was not my choice. What I'm taking you to now is a way for you to get GasMan on your computer at home or when you're not in the hospital. And there, what you do is by clicking on GasMan over here, it will tell you, follow the link to the Dropbox in which you can then download it onto your computer at home and run it. For here, in this lecture, and in any of our own computers, you will find the icon on the desktop. Because we're in Bornstein here, I took that off the desktop, so I better open it. So this is the way it will look on any of the desktops here or at home if you have installed it. It starts out with a very ugly-looking panel. This is called the control panel, and here it has defaulted to isoflurane, which it will color purple because that's the color of the bottle, a semi-closed breathing circuit, and the patient's weight is 70 kilograms. In the back, can you see these figures? Or is it just so-so? The numbers. It's okay? I've always wondered whether, yes, thank you. 60 times real time for speed. Under special, we have special things in the model that you can do to essentially take apart that connectivity that I showed you before from vaporizer to breathing circuit, et cetera, and block certain things from happening. Because there's a workbook that comes with this that we can click to from within the program, or you can very easily download the PDF file of it. And in that, it walks you through a set of experiments. That set of experiments teaches the course in kinetics. It's as if I'm holding your hand, being properly distanced from you, so make it safe, talking to you and telling you the story of here's the gas going from the vaporizer to the breathing circuit. Let's look at the exponential curve. Let's understand the exponential curve. And by the way, everything that's in GasMan is somewhere hidden in the boards. This is something that's part of the core competency of anesthesia, is understanding kinetics. So we have the circuit type. Circuit types that we can choose from are an open circuit or a non-rebreathing circuit. If you're studying a drug and you don't want the breathing circuit to confuse you, you want to control it in a model, even though you can't necessarily do it in the operating room. A semi-closed circuit classically is a mixed compartment where the breathing circuit, where the patient's inspired concentration is the mixture of the patient's exhaled gas and the fresh gas, each of which are flow weighted, so that if the patient is breathing 5 liters a minute of minute ventilation and your fresh gas flow is 5 liters a minute, inspired is only half of your vaporizer setting. And that's the way many of our anesthesia machines really are. It really is a flow-weighted average that way. The Draeger machines are specifically that way. The GE machines are much closer to the open, or what I call here the ideal circuit. Ideal in the sense that the fresh gas is coming in right near the inspiratory valve, so that if the fresh gas flow exceeds the minute ventilation by just a tiny bit, inspired rapidly tracks what the vaporizer is set to. So it's like driving a sports car. And each of the manufacturers know that I say this about them, and we've all agreed that it really does seem to be true that way. Draeger thinks they're a little faster than that, but in my observations in our own operating rooms, giving anesthesia with it, I've discovered that it really is very close to exactly the way I described. The idea of having these two is that the fully mixed one is the slowest anesthesia breathing circuit in the world. The ideal one is the fast one, and all breathing circuits are somewhere between those two. So that if you want to know how good or how bad anything can be, you do 2 simulations, one with one and one with the other, and real patients will be between that no matter what. And I think that's all we need on this panel, as it is called. The next panel is the picture panel that I showed you before. This is the one in which I have the vaporizer, etc. With my hand on the mouse and dragging this, I can go up and down very easily. I can choose a number that I'd actually like exactly. This drug is isoflurane. I'm going to give 2.9%. Why did I pick 2.9%? That's the default value in GasMan model. 2.9% inspired is what gets expired right up to exactly 1 Mac. It's the magic number for isoflurane that nobody ever told you. Each drug has a magic number, and the default value in GasMan is that magic number. So that if theoretically, if you just set the vaporizer to that magic number and folded your hands and watched the patient breathe, the patient's expired concentration would come and flatten off at 1 Mac. And then, as venous blood brought the drug back, it would then rise from there. Interesting concept, and actually is true, and at least 1 or 2 of the chapters in simulations have you do that and look at it and compare. I told you everything else that was there. I'm going to hold down the mouse key now, and I'm going to drag the graph over here, because in general, we always want to see the picture and the graph. And we do it either this way, or if we're smart, we do it this way. So that if I'm doing 2 simulations, I can put them on top of each other, and that way you can see the time alignment. Now, in this graph view, you see it starting out with a default of 15 minutes. It can be as fast as 5 minutes to watch its story, and it can be as long as 24 hours. So we can give a 24-hour anesthetic and look at that simulation and actually tie a few of them together, because one of these days in the U.S., we're probably going to see inhalation anesthetics used in intensive care units, because these drugs allow awakening in less than 10 minutes, no matter how long you've been asleep. If you've been asleep for all of your life and you are breathing either sevoflurane or desflurane, you wake up within 10 or 15 minutes with either of those drugs, despite the fact that you've had it for years and years, because lung clearance is so incredibly good. Other drugs that we have get put in tissues, and then it comes out it typically comes out in the kidneys and is metabolized a little bit, because here 100% of cardiac output is being cleared by the lungs. It's only the drug's solubility that limits how quickly it disappears, and they literally disappear amazingly fast. In Europe, there was a period in the past, and they'll probably come back to it, where in their ventilators, they've actually got an inhaled anesthetic being delivered in with a electronic syringe pump to the inspired concentration, and the drug is usually sevoflurane, and using it as an anesthetic that way. And when you want to do a wake-up to see how the patient is doing, 10 or 15 minutes later, they're awake enough in order to respond, and then you put them back to sleep again for another day or so, if need be. I don't know if we'll ever get here, and I guess I should say that was just off-labeled use for the first time in my talk today. Okay, so we've got that. We don't want to look at a day. We want to look at much shorter periods of time. We now understand what the model does. Let me go back to GasMan for a moment. Let me go back to PowerPoint. So the first thing I think I want to look at is sevoflurane up and down bolus. So let me go back there, alt-tabbing back to GasMan on my screen. So I'm going to choose a different drug. So here, under control, I'm going to choose any one of the following drugs. Small words. Isoflurane, desflurane, enflurane, ether, halothane, isoflurane, nitrogen. If you want to study the bends and would like to do it with GasMan, I will help you. No one has published those papers yet to identify. Who here is a scuba diver? Raise your hand. Have any? Nah. Okay. Different audience. I'm not in Florida. I'm not in California. But I would love to see somebody spend some time doing decompression sickness and seeing as the nitrogen comes out, how does that work? We had a researcher here, Max Ferrigno, who was studying athletes, and we had Streeter, last name, the world champion deep diver. That is, she would hold on the equivalent of a rock, but it was shaped like an arrow, and go down 500 feet or 400 feet. And then her job was to unclip herself and get up to the surface before she died. Tanya Streeter. And for her, I extended GasMan's limits because we wanted to see how many seconds could she spend taking that belt off before she was too anesthetized to do it. And in fact, she did it. And she set the world's record. And I was very proud that we figured that out in these labs right here, how safely you can do something crazy like that. And that's pretty crazy. We have nitrous oxide, we have sevoflurane, and we have xenon. So if you want to explore the kinetics of xenon, it's really cool. Everybody says how fast it's going to be with instant wake-ups. Well, we'll see in a little while here, or at least I'll tell you now in case we don't see it in a little while, that xenon has a brain solubility or brain blood solubility that's no different from our other drugs. And because of that, it will take no matter how fast xenon is cleared by the lungs, the brain is still going to take the same 3 or so minutes to wake up. So we're not going to get instant wake up with xenon. We'll get fast and good clear wake up because the xenon level will come down. And in a little while, I'll ask you to give me suggestions of things we might simulate here. And I did that on purpose. So I'm going to give a sevoflurane anesthetic. Now, sevoflurane bothers me in GasMan because the bottle is yellow. The international standard is yellow. I had to make it be yellow. So we're allowed to change the color of a simulation, and I'm going to make it be black. And that way you will be able to see it better. But if we did a graphic overlay of a bunch of different drugs, you would really like them to have the right colors. And I'm going to give an anesthetic. So we've chosen sevoflurane, semi-closed. No, let me do a faster circuit. Let me use the ideal breathing circuit because that's a better example of how well things work. And let's start out using let's use a 4-liter flow. So I've dragged across, that's 4. Let's set the vaporizer to the top. And let's run this at, I'm going at 60 times real time, so 1 second is 1 minute. And I'm going to pause the simulation when the alveolar partial pressure or alveolar concentration gets up to the dotted line of 1 Mach. Whoops, I was not fast enough. I shall back it up. I shall go to a slower speed. By the way, it can go as slow as 1 times real time, so it's as slow as the actual surgeon is operating. So we won't go that slow. We'll go 5x. So it looks like here, whoops, let me just back it up again. It looks like it has taken about 15 seconds to get alveolar up to 1 Mach. So my resident says to me, Dr. Phillip, our patient must be asleep. My end tidal concentration is 1 Mach. What do you think the patient does? Says, you guys are idiots. Don't you understand that my brain is not there yet? It's going to be a while. And in fact, it will be a while. So here's the vessel-rich group. It's in red over here. I think we got to go faster here. Hold on for a second. I will just, the run button becomes the pause button. We'll go back and speed this up to something much more reasonable, like 20 times real time. I'm just going to spin it back to the beginning, run it right up to there again. So it looks like the brain has gotten to 1 Mac at 2 minutes. So that says the patient is now already at a full 1 Mac after 2 minutes of my ventilating this patient with a reasonable fresh gas flow and the vaporizer set at 8%. If I want to intubate this patient's trachea, I probably want at least 1.5 Mac. 1.5 Mac is good for an LMA. So we'll take it up to 1.5 Mac. And that says we could place an LMA approximately 3 minutes of breathing for the patient, place an LMA with no propofol, no fentanyl before we started. It's a pure inhalation anesthetic. I gave this to about 1,000 patients during my career. Every one of them said, I just went to sleep. And then I said, was there any smell? I said, oh, there was a smell. And then I fell asleep. So it's not as if it smelled bad. The concentration is so high that they become almost initially unconscious. They lose consciousness at about 0.5 Mac in the brain, and that's around here. So they're asleep within the first minute. Now, at this point, we have a problem. We've already got this slight overdose, and in fact, if we're intubating the trachea, we'd go all the way up to 2 Mac. So now I could intubate the trachea, and in the series of patients we did years ago, not a single one of them moved without muscle relaxant at 2 Mac in the brain. And we got there in about 4 minutes. And these studies were Dr. Beverly Phillip and I in a series of at least one publication on specifically this. Let me go out 10 minutes. Now we have a problem. We've got this patient incredibly deep, and we don't want to keep the patient there anymore. I'd take out the ephedrine, I'd take out the phenylephrine, but no. If you get the drug out of the patient's important fast tissues, the vessel-rich group, the brain and the heart, if you get the drug out of there, you never see the hypotension. You never end up using the ephedrine or phenylephrine. You always have it ready. I mean, it's right there at your hand. So what do we do at this point? We turn the vaporizer off. Turn the vaporizer off. We are being very vigilant and we are watching very carefully. Inspired falls rapidly, expired falls rapidly, and someone might say, when expired gets down to 1 Mac, aren't you worried? And the answer is no. The brain is lagging behind the end tidal concentration by about 3 minutes. So when we get the expired concentration down to about 1.5%, that's the right time to turn the vaporizer back on. And I'll go here to 3%. And I'll set the fresh gas flow to 2 liters a minute because we don't need to spend any more money here. By the way, we have spent $2.31 and gotten 65 cents worth of drug into the body. And this is sevoflurane at its real prices. And it looks like we're getting the vessel-rich group pretty much right back down to the 1 Mac where we wanted it. So the case goes on a little while longer and a little while longer, and we're holding the patient at that depth. So I'm just expanding out the time now. So we're looking at more time. And for some reason, the patient's hypovolemic or something else is going on. I see the blood pressure fall. Very briefly, I can turn the vaporizer off. For how long? Let's do it for 1 minute. We're now at 13 minutes. I'm going to set a bookmark. At 12 minutes and 15. Yes. At 13 minutes. We don't have bookmarks in the OR. I've got the vaporizer off. So all I've done is gotten the inspire down, the expire down, and the vessel-rich group back down. And I can now go back up to my same, it might be the same 3% as before. And we can hold the patient at that level. Now the surgeon starts dissecting. She starts pulling on tissues and hurting all sorts of things. At this point, we say, I want the patient deeper. I turn the vaporizer briefly up to the top, leaving my hand on the vaporizer and making sure that I and my resident are both there looking and saying, is this really going to work? Say, I did it in simulation. It looks perfect. I've actually planned this as the response to changes in the patient. And we can get the patient deeper again. And we can then go along, not at that 3%, but maybe at 3.5%. So we've now got this patient up at about 1.5 Mac. The surgeon lets go of the retractors, everything gets softer. Briefly, we turn the vaporizer off again, and then turn it back up to the 3%. So we're doing a bolus up and bolus down technique. We're not giving remifentanil to get the pressure down and phenylephrine to get the pressure up. We're not battling back and forth with IV drugs that are battling against each other. We're using a single drug to titrate things up and down. And everything that I'm showing here has had a manuscript written by someone, most of them in Europe, talking about these techniques. Believe it or not, there's a good study that shows deep sevoflurane is faster than remifentanil to get blood pressure down, for example. I mean, that's these, in this talk, I'm not going to the clinical parts. I'm giving you just the kind of experiments that you could do. You never have to do them in the OR. You can just do them here and say, I understand these things. And when you suddenly get the one patient whose IV infiltrates at the beginning and you don't know what to do to get him asleep, you say, Dr. Phillips says they really go to sleep fast. Let's get this patient to sleep really fast, and then we'll put the IV in. It will happen to you sometime, especially in your pediatric career, and it may happen to you in your adult career. These things really happen. And the answer is there are ways to take care of it and manage it. And as a real anesthesiologist, it's important to understand all of those things. So this was a bouncy bolus up, bolus down on purpose instead of giving all of the IV drugs that we normally do for this. This is a different kind of control. So let me go back to PowerPoint. So this is that kind of an anesthetic. And no, we're not there. I could have had a couple of slides in of end-tidal concentrations on real patients. I did not put them into the talk, where you'll see exactly what would happen with this and when I needed to do it in a patient, which is when I went back and simulated it. I didn't know offhand. I hadn't done it, this, and I hadn't read those papers by my colleague Jan Hendricks in Belgium on how good a job it does, but I knew that that patient needed it. And with that agent monitor showing that things of this sort actually do work. Let me go back. Okay, so we're done with that simulation, and I will save it. Bolus up and down. Great. It was good enough to have that be worth it. Okay, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about high flow and low flow anesthesia. Desflurane is the drug. Who here uses desflurane once in a while at least? Raise your hand. Okay, most. Who never uses it ever? Nope. One or two, okay. The group of environmentalists, of which I am a member of the ASA Committee on Equipment and Facilities, really feel strongly that desflurane is a terrible drug because we generally use it at such high flows that the depletion of the ozone layer is significant. Not as much as cows, not as much as grass and other things in doing that, but at the same time, enough that we better learn how to use low-flow desflurane. So let me do a simulation of that. So I'm on a Windows machine, so it's Control N for new simulation. The drug will be desflurane. It'll come up in blue, as it should. I'm going to use a regular semi-closed circuit. Now we'll be on a Draeger machine with its behavior. And we have two different ways to give this anesthetic. We can do a standard package insert. Well, I shouldn't say that. The package insert says, go up on inspired concentration slowly. Most people think that means go up on the vaporizer slowly, and that is one way that it's usually done. So I'm going to do it that way. I'm going to use a 5-liter fresh gas flow. And I'm going to start out at 3%. My simulation is back to its default value of 60 times real time, and that'll be comfortable enough for us all. I'm going to put the graph over here. And every few breaths, and I'm going to take my vaporizer and begin it at 3%. That's package insert. And every minute or so, I'm going to go up a little, and go up a little, and go up a little. I'm going to pause it long enough for me to look and see how we're doing. So we're now seeing our gas monitor is saying to us 5.8 over 4.1. That is 5.8 of inspired, 4.1 of expired. So we'll go a little further. We're going to let expired get solidly up to a full 6%. Now notice at the moment that we see that end tidal or expired is at 6%. Vessel-rich group is only at 4.7%. If we want to look at the time difference between these two, when we click on the mouse on the surface, we get a ruler. So we can actually see how long it takes. And in general, the delay time from blood to brain is about 3 minutes. So if you want to know where your patient's brain is now, you look at your agent monitor graph and see where it was 3 minutes ago. And that's why some of us guide you in the OR to having a screen which will give you that 3 minutes visibly. And that's why GE on the ASIS machine has the graphics of the machine show you that 3-minute trend, because they've known this for many, many years. Marco Paloheimo, their anesthesiologist leader 20 years ago, got them to make the Datex Ultima have exactly a 6-minute screen so that it was wiping out, the part that was being wiped out was where the brain was, and the part where the expired gas was keeping on going in order to let you visually actually see this, and I just said 6, see this 3-minute delay between those two. So in any case, so we go another 3 minutes or so. And at that point, we're up at just about where we want to be. We'll turn down the vaporizer, and I'll turn it down to 8%. And it looks like we've given a very nice anesthetic, just like the textbook says. And that's great. We've spent $9.42, and we've gotten $1.32 into the patient's body. Let's do another way to give desflurane. So Control N for a new simulation. I'm going to put it down here because we're going to line them up. I'm going to take the graph and I'm going to put it over here. I'm going to choose desflurane again. Now this is going to be a green anesthetic, so I'm going to paint it green. Rather than it being its blue, I'm going to have it be green. And I'm going to start out with the fresh gas flow at 1 liter a minute. And I'm going to turn the vaporizer. I'm turning the vaporizer and not the inspired. I'm turning the vaporizer and not the inspired. I'm turning the vaporizer and not the inspired. up to 18%. I said that 3 times to make sure that no one thinks any different. And now we're going to run it. And when end tidal gets up to 1 Mac, I delay another 3 or so minutes. And then I turn the vaporizer down to 9%. Now these two are looking fairly similar. I haven't shown you yet the overlay graph. The overlay graph is a very powerful tool that I created here to be able to compare things. There's no easy way to do it. Researchers do it by complicated graphs and doing it in very complicated ways. Here, this is the overlay. And it has a sentence here. Show delivered over 1, or show delivered over Mac. So I can plot it any of those ways that I want. So in this case, I have in one case, I had my delivered concentration. I'll go back to onesies, so they're numbers. At 18% vaporizer setting. In the other situation, it was 3% and 7% and 9%, just like the interpretation of the package insert is for many of us. But what happened with the inspired gas? What do you think? It did exactly the same thing in those 2 situations. The only difference is when you use 1 liter fresh gas flow at 18%, everything you do is incredibly precise and consistent. You can give exactly the same anesthetic over and over, as opposed to you're doing something and you're turning up, and you're doing something and you're turning up. So our breathing circuit did this. Our alveolar concentration did this. The vessel-rich group did this. We gave exactly the same anesthetic to the patient. And if we look at the cost, one of them was $9 and one of them was $6. And if we carried these each out for longer, and I'll do that now. If we carried these out now for a half an hour, and left our vaporizer settings and everything else exactly where it is now. So now I'm going to run both of them at the same time. That means when I press the arrow that both of them are going, they will both go out there simultaneously. But I'm getting bored, and so are you, so I'm going to stop it again. I'm going to, with one finger, hold down the Shift key. And when we hit the Shift key, it changes from the speed that I chose before to as fast as possible for all that are going. And so we get it to go out to there, or maybe for an hour. Holding the Shift key down. And now we can see we gave approximately the same anesthetic, except in this case, and here the numbers are, it was $37 versus $16. That graph showing overlay, this is the difference in the cost of these 2 anesthetics. Now, we could get even greener than this. We can go to a very, very low fresh gas flow. Who here has given a fresh gas flow as low as 500 ml a minute? Raise your hand. Keep them up. How about 250 ml a minute rather? Raise your hand. Okay, got it. And anyone been down below 250? You probably can't in adults. If you were in children's and you're with Bob Holtzman or any of the other very low flow people, you'd be down at the metabolic oxygen need of those pediatric patients. So I guess I ought to do a third anesthetic. I guess, yeah, I guess I should. No, I won't do that. Let me first ask, are there any simulations any of you specifically want me to do rather than bothering to do this one? You can imagine what the answer is going to be. It's going to be much cheaper. We're going to turn down the fresh gas flow as soon as we got the patient deep enough. We need the 1 liter a minute to get the Inspire to come up nicely at 18%. And by the way, the company, Baxter, believes in this so strongly that they have a pamphlet that talks about 18% at 1 liter a minute, the manufacturer of the drug. And they asked me to be the editor of it because they were writing 18% at 1 liter per minute is the perfect way to use their drug. If your hospital is complaining or the environmentalists are complaining about you wasting drug and depleting the ozone layer, go to a closed circuit right away and use this drug on a fully closed circuit. So I'm going to go back on both of these. I could have hit the rewind all button, by the way. That rewinds them all back to it. And I'll put in a bookmark at, no, I won't. The trouble with doing this live is I've got to decide what anesthetics are going to be the smartest. Now, I think I won't bother to do this. You can imagine that it's going to be really cheap when I go to a really low fresh gas flow with much less waste. Anyone have any questions that they would like me to explore with them, or even questions either about the model or about the safety of giving anesthesia based on having modeled it first, or anything else of that sort? Our timing is absolutely perfect because we're at 10 of. Questions? Comments? Now, you will find some attendings who will say you're absolutely crazy, and other attendings will say, oh yeah, Dr. Phillip taught me that when I was a resident. I'm glad you asked. Okay, so that it really is a problem for residents, and it will always be a problem for residents. Being able to do something that both you and your attending are comfortable with is crucial. You have to make sure you're consistent that way, and otherwise you will not be happy in the residency program over time. And you've all learned that already, right? Your CA2s and 3s. I'm trying to think what other things we might want to explore. This went faster than I thought because the environment here that I was working in was a lot easier than most environments that I've done this from. Doing this in the Bornstein Lecture Hall is a marvelous thing. Any questions? Questions or comments? No. I may let you guys end early. Is that allowed? Am I allowed to do that, Alex? Good. In that case.
Dr. Phillip is very humble. He made it seamless because he came here at 6:30 in the morning yesterday on his personal time to download GasMan, go through it with the AV team. Not every day you have a full professor doing that. It's so great to see kind of this type of content, everything that you did to make it more available.
And that's why I put it on the machines there. Play with it. Look at the workbook. It's set up in such a way that it just walks through the experiments. I designed GasMan to teach the original article written by Seymour Ketty in 1950, where he wrote the article, How to Understand Inhalation Kinetics. And usually I will give this lecture looking at the step response of a lung with no body connected, where you have an exponential curve with a time constant of volume over flow, and then you add the compartments to each other and it builds it all. If you read the book chapter that I've written in several different textbooks on inhalation kinetics, I go through all of those. You can read those. But here my goal was to go slowly enough that you can say, I could grab that mouse and I could go and play with it. And literally just playing with the model. You grab it and just say, I'm going to do stuff. I'm just going to do Control N, and I'm going to pick a drug like Xenon. I haven't done Xenon ever, I don't think. Ooh, Xenon has a MAC of about 70. And alveolar is following inspired really fast and really well. These two are really fast, but the vessel-rich group is the same 3 minutes. And one never would have guessed this. I've sat next to the people who are bringing Xenon to market in international meetings, and popped out my laptop and did a couple of these simulations and had them say, wow, we really didn't understand our drug. Now we do. So now you understand how to explore any of these drugs that you want. Thank you.
Thanks again.